Hello and welcome to part 5, this time looking at error and status messages. Back to the simulator. Now we've already seen one of these messages, the one that appeared when we built this circuit when we were in DC simulation mode. And there's a little warning that came up. We're in DC simulation mode, but there are no DC sources. So that when we put a voltmeter on there and the voltmeter reads 0 volts, there is something to explain why it appears to have a voltage source of 1 volt and yet the voltmeter reads 0. It's because the voltmeter is reading the average voltage, and this is an AC voltage source, so it's oscillating up and down from +1 to -1, but its average value really is 0. There are a few other warning and error messages that you might come across when you're wiring up circuits, and I just wanted to have a quick look at some of those. First of all, supposing I had another resistor in the circuit like this, and I moved the resistor so that it was at that point there. That's not a good way to draw circuits. There is a terminal inside the body of the resistor. You will get a little warning about that too. Junction inside or too close to another component. Let's get rid of that voltage source and replace it with a DC voltage source so we don't get that AC warning. Another time that you might get a warning is if there's two terminals too close together. Supposing I put another resistor in the circuit like this, maybe, and moved this terminal so it was on top of that terminal. That is an incredibly confusing way to draw a circuit because it looks like there are 6 wires going into a single terminal. You don't know whether all those 6 wires are joined together or whether you've actually got 2 terminals with 2 groups of 3 wires but no connection between those 2 groups. Very bad way to try and draw circuits, that, and the simulator will warn you by flashing red saying don't like it, not happy. Drag one of the terminals, junctions, these black boxes, these black circles rather, are junctions where 3 wires actually do meet up and connect together. Drag them away and then it'll be happy. Other errors, let's get rid of that one. Other errors that you might come across when simulating. We talked about current sources before. Now if I just drag a current source onto the circuit like this, it will at the beginning be flashing red, which means error warning. And the trouble is here that the current source is trying to force 1 milliamp of current to flow through it, but it cannot do that because there is no circuit to force that current to flow through. So a little warning will come up at the bottom. Current source has no path to supply current through. Flashing warning. As soon as I connect it up to a circuit so that it can force the current to flow through and around the circuit, it will come back and say, yep, I'm now happy, stop flashing. There's another instance with current sources that you might see an error, and that's this one. Now that's okay, because this current source is trying to force 2 milliamps through this, 1 milliamp up through this wire, and this current source is also trying to force 1 milliamp through this wire. So both of these current sources will be happy if there is 1 milliamp flowing up through this wire. But if one of these current sources was 2 milliamps and the other one was 1 milliamp, they couldn't do it. This one is trying to force 2 milliamps up through here. This one is trying to force 1 milliamp up through here. But it has to be the same current flowing up through this wire. You can't suddenly generate more current in the middle of a wire. So something is wrong. The simulation cannot solve itself. Its little warning message comes up. Current source contradiction detected. Another problem you might find, supposing I set this resistance value here to 0. And I change this current source from a current source to a voltage source. So I'm trying to send a 1 volt voltage source across a 0 ohm resistor. And the problem with that is that an infinite amount of current would be trying to flow. Ohm's law, if you've come across Ohm's law, says that the current through a resistor is the voltage across the resistor divided by the value of the resistor. And if the value of the resistor is 0, then that would mean that an infinite current is trying to flow. You get warning error, cannot find sensible solution. Is there a contradiction somewhere or an unbelievably large current? Yes, there's an unbelievably large current flowing here. Just as there was a problem with the conflict in two current sources, there can also be a problem with the conflict between two voltage sources. Supposing I build this circuit. Well, it's happy because this voltage source is trying to ensure that this point here is 1 volt above here, and so is this voltage source. But if one of these voltage sources was set to 2 volts, wouldn't work. This voltage source is trying to make this point here 2 volts above this point here, but this voltage source is trying to force this point to be 1 volt above this point here. It can't be both. They can't both be operating happily. So that's an error. Once again, flashing red, something is wrong. In this case, it's a contradiction between these two voltage sources. Get rid of one of them, everything is happy again. Right, I think that's the majority of the errors and problems that you're likely to find. If you find anything else, do let me know. The simulator is under constant development. I'm very interested in any strange behaviour that it might exhibit. Next time, we'll have a look at how to save and load circuits and at the library of presets that it comes with.